What does a knife do to a student's ability to craft?
It changes their whole world. And when we give them the knife, when we give our students here at Red Cliff a knife, we talk about them leaving the Stone Age and moving into the age of steel, and what that means to them, and what that means to their little tribe, their group. Like it's a big deal for them to get a knife after using stone tools for that long. Even cutting cord, we'll ask them to cut with a stone tool for certain tasks. And so when they get a knife, we talk about like the advance that they just made, the leap in history that they just made. But they go from cutting notches with stone tools to cutting notches with fireboard. So they go from early in the day being afraid of blowing out a notch on their fireboard and being a little fearful to get too many fires once they have a good hole going, to not worrying about that at all, because now carving a notch, nothing. Sharpening a spindle, it's nothing. Cutting food, we don't have a lot of food that needs to be cut, but even just cutting their food is convenient. If they were to get a potato before they have a knife, all the students cook their own food here, so if they were to get a potato before they had a knife, they'd just bite chunks off, which I'm not opposed to myself. I still do the same thing when I'm in the field sometimes, but they bite chunks off and put it in their pot, or they use their spoon and kind of scoop chunks off, or they get creative with their pot lids and stuff like that. But then you get a knife, and that just simplified that process a whole bunch. And they're usually very grateful for when they do get that knife. But their ability to craft with a knife is so much greater than without. It's a tremendous leap in technology right there.
So what are some of the things that they can make once they have a knife?
Most students, as soon as they get a knife, first thing they want to do is they want to carve a new spoon to eat with. Because everybody in the field at Red Cliff uses a wooden spoon, a handmade wooden spoon to eat with. And so they want to carve themselves a new wooden spoon. And I would say that a large portion of the students, they not only want to carve themselves a wooden spoon, but their buddies that don't have knives yet, they want to carve and give them a wooden spoon too. They're pretty excited about that. And then from there, making traps. We do traps. We don't actually trap animals, but we teach them how to make a figure four and a Paiute, and we teach a snare and a few other things like that. So making traps all of a sudden became a breeze to them, especially if they've passed off their trap assignment with stone tools. A lot of times they'll want to do traps again just because they can, just because they have a knife and they want to see what it's like with a knife.
What kind of snare do you teach?
We don't have, so a lot of the snares that are taught out here are a hybrid snare. We don't have a lot of trees that bend very well. So they'll use like a deadfall type snare where they'll weight the other end of it rather than having a bent branch. And it's usually some sort of a hybrid type snare like that that's used. And it's all, the snares are staff driven, so it depends on what they want to teach. We give them some autonomy there. The only two traps that they have to teach are the figure four and the Paiute deadfall. The snare, they can bring in some creativity depending on where they're at in the course area, what materials are available, and like I said, we just don't have very many trees that bend. Mostly junipers. They don't bend well. They don't give a good spring.
No.
So yeah, so we'll have them. We'll make the traps, and they're usually really excited to do it after they have a knife.
So what are some of the other crafting projects that students at Red Cliff work on?
They like to make what we call here at Red Cliff a penwaka, and they will be very creative in how they make those. They will take an old glove that's torn up and has holes in it, and they will use the finger of the glove, and they will create a necklace, sort of like a penwaka or a heart pouch. It'll be a necklace that their pens will slide into, and somewhere along the line, somebody figured out that the finger of a glove is a really nice shape for the pens. They'll make the penwakas, they'll make heart pouches, they'll make bead necklaces and bead bracelets, and they'll do other fire bags to put their fire equipment in, so leather bags with tassels and stuff like that to hold their fire equipment. We've started doing, just recently, I've been in the field teaching moccasins, and I've been teaching pine needle baskets, and I've been teaching more wood carving techniques. And so when I come into the field, or if we do a skills day, even the students that don't have a knife, they haven't earned a knife themselves, if they're at a place where they can be trusted with a sharp, they can have knife privileges for the day to make whatever craft we're making. But most of those crafts, it's when I make moccasins, for instance, if I have somebody that needs special attention because they couldn't use a sharp, rather than having them stitch, we'll punch holes and they'll stitch with leather strap instead and make a bag that's just as beautiful as one that's stitched with artificial sinew. We'll make, what else are we making? Stuff out of wool. We'll make wool bags, wool mittens. We didn't this winter. In years past, we've made capotes in the field. I intend to do this next year. I intend to make wool capotes with all of the students in the field. The staff made them this winter. We just didn't. The winter was over before I got to the point that we could flood the field with capotes. Time on my part, I guess, teaching the staff some of these crafty things.
Just tell us what a capote is.
A capote, it is a coat that's made out of a wool blanket. And they came from a couple different regions, but the one that I'm most familiar with is the French brought them over to northeastern Canada when they came over and started trapping a lot. And a lot of these guys, they could make their own coat in the field out of a wool blanket. And so they're really simple designs for the most part. As time went on, it got to where there were makers in both Canada and what eventually became the United States. So you could buy them, you could trade for them, and they started to get quite elaborate. They started putting different collar designs on them and hoods and stuff like that. What we do here is we just do a very simple design, something that you could, if you had a wool blanket and you had the need to make a coat, you could make it in the field with no pattern, just off your body size. You could make yourself a wool coat. All stitched together. We stitched ours together with artificial sinew, and I had a little bit of wool yarn that I offered up to the staff to stitch if they wanted or to decorate with. Some of our staff, they went home and came back with wood toggles and bone buttons and antler buttons and different things, and they've decorated them up. So, and that's the intention with our students too, is to do that. So next year we're going to do the wool-feared hats, wool hats with wool fears on the top. We'll give them a little bit of fur to put on there, and the capotes and the gloves, and this summer we're going to do tire sandals. So we'll bring some tire sandals into the field. We do a little bit of bead looming. We'll do, boy, I don't know. We'll be as crafty as the field staff are willing to be.
So what does that do to a group when you've got staff and students making these things that they're going to use for themselves?
You know, when a person gathers a tree branch or just a piece of wood that they found on the ground, and they put their energy into making that into a spoon or whatever it is that they're making out of that, a talking stick or a bow, and they're putting their energy into that piece of material that they gathered from nature, there's a connection there that happens. And that connection is something that I talk about with them on a regular basis. And I encourage the field staff to talk about too. You know, and when they're making, one of the moccasin patterns that I teach is, I guess you'd call it an Iron Age style moccasin. And it really wasn't found here in the U.S. to my knowledge, and I may be wrong there. Another pattern came from the southwest of the United States. It's a local Native American style moccasin. And I explained to them that regardless of where your ancestors come from, when you're doing these skills and you're crafting and you're making these things, you're connecting with your ancestors' their way of life and the things that they would do just to live. And I'll stop and I'll ask them, typically I'll stop and I'll ask them, could you imagine if you had to make these shoes for yourself? on a regular basis. Every time the soles wore out, you had to make a new pair, you know. And I'll get a variety of responses, but the one that I most commonly hear is, I'd probably get pretty good at it, because right now I'm really slow, you know. So there's a connection there that happens, but it's also just being creative and tapping into that side of your brain. I really like what Brene Brown says in her books, where she's talking about one of the common attributes that wholehearted people have is that they're creative. And I've really found that in my own life experience to be true, that it does something to help. I believe that it helps people find a balance in their tapping into that creative side of them. And then another big thing that it does for our students here at Red Cliff is it gives them a token, something that they can take home. And they're usually pretty excited about it, especially if they're not a very crafty or creative person in general. Like, they don't do that in their own time very much, and they produce this thing, and they're usually really proud of it. And it does a variety of things for them. One of the things that happens is it's like it documents that phase in their life or that time in their life, and it's a token that they can take with them and to help them remember. It's like, oh yeah, I remember making that, sitting under a tarp, and there was a foot of snow outside, and we were huddled around this fire, and I was making this thing, and it was really hard, and I was struggling, and then that whole flood of memories comes back, you know. And so I think it goes with students in wilderness therapy. I think it goes beyond just creating that balance and connecting with the earth. I think it's also something that they're going to potentially take with them as a token of, you know, the place that they were at. And I've heard back from a lot of students, and they've told me that, you know, they're like, I still have that, whatever it is that I made. I still have. Remember when I carved that spoon? Remember when so and so gave me that heart pouch that they made, and they put it around my neck, and I cried, and it was just the coolest thing that ever happened to me. And or when I made those moccasins in the field, or, you know, it's just as monumental as the first bow drill fire that they get, or the first time that they do a 15-mile hike when they didn't think they were going to be able to pull it off. So yeah.
What else would you like to say about crafting or bushcrafter?
I personally am very passionate about bushcrafting and crafting. I do a lot of it myself at home, and I believe that that's one of the things that I can bring to doing this work is the art that I do. I can bring it in and share it, and everybody brings in something different. And you know, if you do this work long enough, it seems like you kind of find your niche in the work. And I would say that's maybe my niche, is being able to share those. I have that knowledge. I know how to make the moccasin patterns. I know how to make the capote patterns and teach the class, keep the class rolling. And I know how to, you know, sharpen carving knives, for instance. And I'm a wood carver at home in my own time. I'm passionate about those things. And so it's exciting for me to be able to come out and teach it, and then to teach something that I feel has that much value, makes it just that much more exciting for me to be able to do that and share it. And then when other people get excited about it with me, I mean, it's just a good experience for everybody. And I hope it doesn't go away.
What do you have to say about the modern bushcrafting movement, the interest in bushcrafting that's kind of blown up here lately?
Well, I think people have just given a name to something that was going on for a long time. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was called bushcrafting way back when, and I just didn't know it. Mm-hmm. I think it's cool. I really do. I like it. I embrace it. I don't see any problem with it. It's in fact, I like the idea of one of the things that I struggled with when people would say primitive skills. When I first came into wilderness therapy, is they would say they were doing some primitive skills, and they'd break out a brand new saw, this big old honking knife, mm-hmm. you know, and and some sandpaper to sand it smooth. And I was like, I don't know if that would really qualify. Of course, I didn't say this to people, for a long time. And I was like, I don't know if that's really primitive or not. Like, you're creating this thing that would be resembling a primitive thing, but you're using modern tools. And so one of the things I like about the term bushcrafting is it's leaving it open to use what you want. You want to use a saw, you want to use these gouges and some sandpaper or whatever you want to do, and it's all available. But you'll see guys that are, into bushcrafting, and they're wearing moccasins. They're wearing handmade shoes that they made by themselves, but they're carrying a commercial pack and a saw with a hatchet on the back, and that's cool. And so I like that idea. I like the idea of being able to just put it all together and be in nature, because really that's what it's about. I know people that struggle with it. They don't, they feel like it's something that shouldn't be happening. It's not true, primitive technology or true primitive skills, and it's not. And I agree, it's not. And I'm glad that they have whoever developed that name of bushcrafting. I mean, I think it's great that happened. And I like to personally switch back and forth. I like primitive skills where I'll use all handmade tools, and I like to participate in bushcrafting and use a knife and all of the modern tools that I have at my disposal. All of the tools I'm willing to carry on my back, I guess I should say.
Thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe. The Primitivus project is made possible by the generous sponsorship of Wingate Wilderness Therapy. To learn more, visit wingatewilderness.therapy.com.